your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. And if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Over the next couple of hours, we're going to look at election 2016 and then some abortion comments. First, it was Donald Trump. Now it's Hillary Clinton. And we'll get into some of that a little bit later. Also, some questions being raised about the effectiveness of the Democratic nomination and whether or not it was rigged against Bernie Sanders since the very beginning. Some of you in the state of Georgia are talking about the possibility of trying to override the veto from the governor there in Georgia on the case that we talked about recently, and we'll get into some of these religious liberty cases, especially as we look tomorrow at the Wisconsin primary, which I think is going to be one that Ted Cruz will win. But some people have pointed out that winning that might deny Donald Trump the requisite 1237 delegates, but it also might be the end of that possibility for Ted Cruz as well, because after Wisconsin, you have New York and Connecticut, which are both proportional, so they split a few there. Then you have some various primaries, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, which are winner-take-all. Got to believe that Donald Trump wins those. And by that time, it's almost mathematically, if not actually mathematically impossible for Ted Cruz to get 1237 delegates. So we'll see how this plays out. But before we get into some of those issues, we wanted to address a topic that certainly is one that we have spent a fair amount of time talking about, and that is the need to get the younger generation, the so-called millennial generation, actually involved in the political process. Now, it has been true over the years that the younger you are, the less likely you are to be involved in politics, but I think this has become even more of an acute issue. And so here on the program, we've spent a fair amount of time talking about millennials, certainly talked a lot about getting involved politically with our Pray, Organize, and Vote material. And so I thought it would be great to bring Allie Beth Stuckey onto the program today. She's originally from Dallas. Matter of fact, I've had her mother on talking about autism. Her father actually serves in the Texas legislature. She graduated from Furman University and then headed to Athens, Georgia. She actually, when she was at the university, delivered the commencement speech, and that was one of the things that really confirmed her gift to actually be a communicator. Since then has been a publicist, a social media strategist, a blogger, and we have a link to her blog, The Conservative Millennial Blog. And Allie Beth, thank you so very much for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, Kerby. Thanks so much for having me.
You know, I mentioned your family. You grew up in a family where, you know, your dad has served with distinction in the Texas legislature as a representative. Your mom, of course, I've gotten to know her over the years because, you know, we've talked about her book on autism. But you grew up pretty much in a family where most people spent a fair amount of time talking about political issues.
Right.
But your fellow millennials, maybe they didn't grow up in something quite like that, did they?
Right. Yeah, I really was privileged to grow up in a house where we talked about politics, and we did watch the news, but I really can't say that I was terribly involved or interested myself. Like a lot of people my age, I grew up in the social media kind of personal profile about me section generation, where everything was indeed about us. And so I really didn't have that much interest in politics until I got to college. My dad ran for state representative and won, and it was about that time that I really started getting involved in politics myself and started getting interested. So what I would say to millennials that maybe didn't grow up the same way that I did, with parents who were very involved in the conservative movement, talk to me about politics, watch the news, I would encourage them by saying that they are, one, totally normal. Most people my age can probably say that they weren't very interested in politics growing up, and I can say that myself, even with political parents. And I would also say that it is never too late, especially as a millennial, to get involved and to be educated about the issues. You don't have to grow up in a political family to get involved. You don't have to know everything about the political sphere and what's going on in the election to care and to vote. I actually think it's very, very simple to get involved and to make a difference in your community through voting and through being politically active.
Let's give some of the numbers. I think I've heard you say before that less than 26% of those in the millennial generation actually list politics in their top three interests. So you've got some work to do if you are going to, as you are, speaking on this issue and blogging on this issue, right?
Absolutely. So like you said, only 26% of millennials consider politics in their top three interests. And furthermore, only 43% of millennials follow national news stories regularly. So more than half of us have no idea what's even going on in the United States of America. We are very much in a bubble in our own little world, whether that be college or jobs or friend groups, organizations, whatever it is. More than half of us have no idea what's going on in America. We happen to be very complacent and apathetic when it comes to things like political issues, international issues, anything like that. We don't really want to hear about it. So I'm trying to do my best to go around college campuses and different organizations with young millennials and talk about, in a fun way, hopefully, a fun and engaging way, why voting is so important and why, maybe for the first time ever for some of these millennials, these issues that are happening in this election actually affect them in a very real way. Maybe before it only affected their parents, but now it's going to affect your taxes, your job, your national security, your family's future. And I think that for the first time, that's really clicking for a lot of millennials.
Let's, if we can, too, also remind our listeners, and since I've written on the millennial generation and done videos, and of course we have quite a few on our own website about this, that the millennial generation may be the most educated generation in history. If you look at those individuals who, by the age of 25, who have achieved a college degree, that percentage is higher than any generation preceding them, including, the baby boomers and baby busters and others. So on the one hand, you have, Allie Beth, this idea that these are very educated individuals, and the more educated you are, the more likely you are to vote, usually. But at the same time, you've already pointed out the lack of, if you will, curiosity and awareness about what's happening in their world.
Right. And I also think it has something to do with the fact that higher education institutions are very anti-establishment. So there's a huge amount of cynicism when it comes to people my age, when it comes to things like voting, and when it comes to things like the government. For some reason, I think a lot of people my age have the notion that because we can't trust the government or because we don't like the establishment, then we're just not going to do anything about it. We might complain about it, we might talk about it on social media, but actually getting out there and voting and doing something about it, no, we're just not going to do that. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, like I said, higher education institutions, very anti-government in a lot of ways and very anti-establishment. And so we kind of have this individualized idea that we can do it all ourselves, and we don't really want to get involved in the political sphere, this political world, even though we really like to complain about it.
Let's take a break. When we come back, let's get into a little more of the detail. Allie Beth oftentimes is speaking on campus and also has been blogging about this. So let's see if we can answer the question, why is it that these millennials don't care? Then how and does she bring about kind of, if you will, an aha moment where things begin to click? What are some of the things that she says so that you can take some of these principles and use them in your sphere of influence? And of course, we have a link to the Conservative Millennial blog. Those of you out there that would like to read a very insightful blog, we encourage you to go there and sign up. We'll talk more with Allie Beth Stuckey right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
We all love Disney movies and Disney theme parks, but I doubt too many Christians loved what Disney threatened to do in Georgia. The Disney company threatened to pull back its film and television productions in Atlanta and force the governor's veto of a religious freedom bill that would protect pastors and Christian businesses from gay bullies. Meanwhile, the Disney company has placed theme parks in China. In fact, a $5.5 billion theme park will soon open in Shanghai, China. This is the same country that had a brutal one-child policy and forced abortions. This is a country with a terrible legacy of human rights abuses, with brutal crackdowns and labor camps. If you don't see the hypocrisy and double standard of these two positions, then I'm not sure there is much more that I can say that will make you see the obvious. It reminded me of the famous essay by one of my Georgetown professors. In her essay on dictatorships and double standards, Jeane Kirkpatrick was critical of the Carter administration's demands that autocratic countries quickly liberalize their policies while rarely applying such rhetoric to communist governments. Disney would be good to focus its attention on the repression in China before ever threatening to punish Georgia for wanting to protect people of faith. David French asked this question: why does the Walt Disney Company prefer communists to Christians? The Religious Freedom Bill is actually something that the Disney Company would support, but they're listening to gay activists. The bill would protect pastors from being forced to officiate at homosexual weddings and protect religious organizations from having to rent their facilities for events that violated their beliefs. Disney's double standard needs to be exposed for what it is. The company is willing to turn a blind eye to the huge log of true discrimination in China, but then turns around to focus on an alleged speck in the eye of Georgia. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, God's Not Dead 2. A question about Jesus could cost Grace Wesley everything. Now playing, rated PG. God'sNotDeadTheMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Allie Beth Stuckey, and again, I might direct you to the Conservative Millennial blog for more information. We have that on our website, pointofview.net. Allie Beth, let's, if we can, maybe for just a few minutes, kind of sit back and listen to what you say when you actually speak on various college campuses. And I obviously know that you spend a fair amount of time helping millennials understand why they maybe don't care as much about the political arena as previous generations. Why so?
A lot of times I'm talking to a sorority, and that's kind of the age group and the group that I can really relate to. I know how they think, what they're going through, what they're thinking, so that kind of really helps me relate to them. So the first thing I do is just ask them some questions, really easy, basic questions. For example, I'll put a picture of Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton up and make them all raise their hands and tell me who it is. You would be surprised, you would actually be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, how many people don't know who the candidates are, who's running for president. And it really backs up a lot of statistics just about the fact that the general public, but especially millennials, really have no idea what's going on in the election. It might be a little bit different this election just because there's a lot of hoopla and there's a lot of celebrity going on. So that's kind of helps a little bit awareness. But millennials in general have no idea who's running, who's conservative, who's liberal, who's Republican, who's Democrat, and they don't really care. And so I kind of walk them through, even though they are millennials themselves, I kind of walk them through how we got to be the way we are and why we don't really care about politics. And I won't go into all of it because it kind of ends up being a history lesson.
Yes.
But what I point to is really the Great Depression. So the Great Depression obviously had a huge effect on our great-grandparents and our grandparents and our parents. And what it necessarily instilled in those three generations were hard work, awareness, and the value of a dollar. Those were three things that those three generations absolutely had to have because of the effects of the Great Depression. And I can't speak for all millennials, but I can speak for myself that even though my parents grew up in not very privileged homes, they were very, very poor when they got married, they worked to make sure that I had a better life than they did. And like you said, we're the most educated generation. I was able to go to college and have a lot of different opportunities that my parents just didn't have. They worked really hard to make sure that I had a better life than they did. And I think that that is true for many millennials, that because their parents had hard work, because their parents had awareness and the value of a dollar, they created better lives for millennials than they might have had. And that's a great thing, one, because we had more education and we have more opportunities than our parents did, but it is absolutely a double-edged sword. So we don't, in turn, have as much awareness. We don't, in turn, have as much hard work. In fact, 70% of bosses who employ millennials say that we are not willing to pay our dues in our first job. And I absolutely know that to be true. So one thing we lack is hard work. And the third thing we lack is the value of a dollar. If you ask college students where they would spend $1,000, I guarantee you they would not say investments or savings or probably anything practical. They would probably say technology or clothes or something like that. So we are very into instant gratification. We are very interested in how things affect us. If something is not on our social media timeline, if something is not trending, it is very, very difficult for a millennial to see or to be aware of anything outside of that.
Wow. Yeah, now let's just use an example. You live in Georgia right now, and you went to school in South Carolina, and a lot of our stations are in places like Georgia and South Carolina. That would be a very easy argument to make for a millennial, and that is when Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act came into being, those individuals, especially in Georgia, saw their insurance premium rates, sometimes quadruple, but certainly double or triple. And and all sorts of other things happen. So for them to sit there and say, well, really doesn't matter what happens in the political arena, they are paying, if they are now paying for their insurance, maybe their parents are paying for their insurance, but if they're paying for insurance, they're paying a whole lot more, sometimes as singles, than they ever would if they were able to get a policy in the past before you had the Affordable Care Act.
Right. And I think a lot of the reason that we're totally unaware of that, or maybe we just didn't care before. One, like you said, in college, we weren't really worried about insurance or what was happening with Obamacare. We either called it Obamacare or Affordable Care Act. That was basically all we knew, depending on whether we liked Obama or not. But we didn't know how it was going to actually affect us. And I think, like I was saying earlier, this is kind of the first time that a lot of millennials, especially my age, are actually seeing the practical effects of a presidency. And they're saying, hey, I either really like this or I don't like this. And, the decision that I'm going to make now and in November really affects my paycheck, or it really affects what I have to pay for, or how safe I am, or, the kind of job that I can get. And I think before, whereas we were kind of largely ignorant to that, we're kind of waking up to that for the first time, which is really a lot of reason why you see a lot of college students who love Bernie Sanders. Because of the idea that socialism is great and socialism is awesome. Well, most of those people haven't actually had to get a real job and haven't actually had a paycheck yet. So it's all kind of theoretical. So a lot of people that kind of just have political theories in college, they just haven't really been woken up to the reality of what their choices mean.
Well, you mentioned Bernie Sanders. You wrote a piece on Bernie Sanders. And of course, what you were doing to attract people is to say, well, I agree with the purpose that he's talking about, but I disagree with socialism. And I would imagine that somebody's writing the conservative millennial blog, even before I got to your punchline, knew what your answer would be. But help me, Allie Beth, for just a minute to understand why so many of your fellow millennials do accept Bernie Sanders. Matter of fact, the survey that we just put out, and we have the new issue that just came out on Outlook on socialism, we document once again something we've talked about before. Those under the age of 30, about 1/3 of them believe capitalism is better than socialism. 1/3 believe socialism is better than capitalism. And another 1/3 really aren't sure which is better, which means that about 2/3 of your generation are not real supporters of the free enterprise system. Why is that?
Oh, my goodness. That is very troubling. Not surprising at all, but very troubling. I think a lot of that has to do with how the media portrays business. If you look at most movies, the business tycoon or the business owner is having an affair. He's not morally responsible. He's the guy that you don't trust. We automatically associate being successful in business or capitalism in general as being greedy, as being selfish, as being corrupt. And that's exactly what the government or big government would have us think, somehow turning the attention away from their own corruption to the corruption of small business, big business, success in general. And so I think for some reason the media has portrayed capitalism in that light, as being very selfish, as being very corrupt. And we have bought into this lie that our trust should go instead to the government, that the government is going to better take care of people than a healing economy. And I think that the media and even social media portrays that, which is very ironic because all of the celebrities that are touting the importance of socialism and how socialism is going to save so many lives themselves definitely benefit from the effects of capitalism, but they're kind of just ignoring that and talking about how important socialism is and how we should just all be giving half of our stuff to the government and trusting them to take care of the poor. And it seems on the surface like a compassionate argument, and if there's one really good thing about millennials is that we are compassionate. We are a compassionate generation. We do not like to see people hurting. As selfish as we may be on some fronts, we are compassionate, and I think that the whole front that both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton have put up of being loving and tolerant and accepting and compassionate through big government, I think that they are very cleverly kind of tapping into that part of the millennial generation.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, let's take some phone calls. Perhaps you have some thoughts about why it is that the youngest generation is less involved politically and maybe less aware of current events and conventional wisdom. So I'd love to get your thoughts. 1-800-351-1212. If you're a millennial, certainly would love to hear from you. But even if not, I would certainly want to get your thoughts about this, because this is going to be a very significant election in 2016, and it will be interesting to see how that plays out. Of course, the other issue on the table that we just raised, and that is, why is it that a whole generation of young people believe that socialism may be the better answer, or at the very least say, well, we're not convinced that capitalism is the answer? So if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And we do have a link to the Conservative Millennial blog, or you can just simply type theconservativemillennialblog.com, but we made it real easy with a link. And you can also click on the picture of Allie Stuckey and find out a little bit more about her as well. Don't forget, we also have our Pray, Organize, and Vote material. It's available to you on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
From Pure Flix comes God's Not Dead 2. A classroom answer to an honest question about Jesus could cost Grace Wesley the teaching career she loves.
I would rather stand with God and be judged by the world than stand with the world and be judged by God.
God's Not Dead 2. Now playing. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at godsnotdead.com.
In case you didn't know it, there's a presidential election in November, and it's shaping up like something out of Judges chapter 9 in the Bible. Our country is as divided as ever, and it's time for Christians to pull out our secret weapon. Yes, we must vote. Yes, we need to organize others to join us, but most important, we need to pray. We need to pray. Point of View will help you do that when you sign up for our Pray, Organize, Vote campaign at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, Vote. Stay informed. Get practical tools at pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Allie Beth Stuckey with us today as we are talking about her conservative millennial blog. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head up first to Michigan, WPAE. Timothy, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for letting me speak a little comment. First of all, I want to say thank you to you, Kerby. I do appreciate your program. You're one of my favorite programs on our local radio station.
Well, thank you.
And I appreciate your commentary. Second of all, I wanted to just point out, and maybe I'll mention this, I kind of just turned it on. It seems like the young people on the other side are voting for Ted Cruz, and it seems like young people in general tend to vote for the radical, extreme positions on either party side. And thirdly, I just want to say, the only answer, for the socialist mentality, for those, opposing worldviews, is Christianity, and the gospel. And we preach on college campuses and bring that message to the young people, because Christianity is compassionate and loving, but at the same time, it's it talks about responsibility, and that's something very lacking today.
Hard work, and those who will not work will not eat, and go to the anthill sluggard and observe her ways. I mean, a lot of biblical principles that certainly would apply to that. And Timothy, I think, raises a good question, Allie Beth, because we do see that, not only do you have a number of young people flocking to Bernie Sanders, feel the burn, but you also have a number flocking to people like a Ted Cruz or even a Donald Trump. I mean, right now it seems to be, and this is true not just of younger people, but the electorate in general, they're kind of looking for an outsider.
Absolutely, and that's what I was going to say, and that's a really interesting point about Ted Cruz as well. As we know, he is the outspoken anti-establishment candidate, and even though Bernie Sanders has been in politics for years and years, he kind of touts himself as the anti-establishment candidate, at least compared to Hillary Clinton as well. And I think kind of what we touched on earlier about higher education being very much anti-establishment and being very individualized. I think people my age are looking for an outsider, like you mentioned, Kerby, someone who is kind of going to rough things up. And maybe, Bernie Sanders talks about a political revolution. I think a lot of us like the idea of a revolution. I think a lot of us like the idea of things changing, of things being different, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Maybe just, a power shift or a power change there. Maybe that would do some good for our economy, whatever side you're on. I think that's kind of what people my age are thinking, that someone from the outside is going to come in, shake things up, and is going to make America, for a lack of a better term, great again.
And again, I think we're going to have some revolution taking place, possibly. I mean, in 1968, you had a big revolution of the Democratic Convention, and I'm not saying anything like that, but there are Democrats right now that have wondered whether or not the Democratic presidential nomination is rigged with all 700-plus super delegates, which makes it easier for Hillary Clinton to win over Bernie Sanders. You have on the other side people wondering whether or not there's going to be a change in Rule 40 before the Republican convention that would change some of the rules so they could bring in an outsider. So if some of that plays out, I can certainly see, Allie Beth, some of the cynicism that your generation has, legitimately so, even having more of it about the political process. So we'll see how that plays itself out over the next couple of months.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, I'm kind of under the opinion that, even though I personally, I'll just go ahead and say I am not the biggest fan of Donald Trump in the world, I also think that the vote should definitely be with the people, and whoever the people vote for, that should be who the nominee is. And I don't like the idea at all of the Rules Committee changing rules and things like that. I know that's kind of how it goes. But I would rather the hands of the people actually pick the candidate rather than the establishment. But that's just kind of my personal opinion, and I think a lot of millennials share that as well.
I would think so. Again, Conservative Millennial Blog, and we have information about that. But let's move to South Carolina. Bryce, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Allie Beth Stuckey.
Thank you, Kerby. I really appreciate you taking my call. Also, Allie Beth, you're right on. It's so good for a grandma to hear a young girl have her head on right. But I know why you do. I know why you do, because you know the Lord. I want to answer the question about why the millennials seem to find Bernie Sanders so attractive. I think we've all slightly touched on that, the outsider, the establishment, that things aren't working at set. But my spirit witnesses to this, that he represents the grandfather, the kindly grandfather that many millennials have. The one that isn't their parents who are working all day and they're latchkey kids. The one who always listens, the one that always has a smile, and the one that understands. That's what Bernie has for them. And because we're such a society today, running on what you look like, Bernie absolutely has that grandfatherly appeal. But in saying that, I believe that the generation of millennials and many others, unless they are taught the Word of God, will fall for anything. Bernie Sanders has come as an angel of light, and it's a lie from the pit of hell. Also, the schools and education has dumbed down our young ones to the degree where they're not even really caring or paying attention because they don't know what to pay attention to, or they haven't been taught what to care about.
Yeah, distraction issues are certainly the case. And I would add one more, Allie Beth, and that is nothing like free education. You know, if you thought education was expensive now, imagine what it's going to be like when we make it free, you know, because so what about what Bryce had to say? You got some thoughts about that?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's a little bit of what you just said. Offering free education, that is kind of a grandfatherly thing to do. We love our grandparents because they spoil us, and I think that Bernie Sanders offers kind of the same thing, that he says, oh, I am not going to make you pay for your debts. I'm going to give you free college. I'm going to make sure that you have this, this, and this. Everything is a right. Nothing's a privilege anymore. You shouldn't have to work for anything. These are all fundamental things that you were born with the right to have. And, I mean, who doesn't want to hear that? Especially our generation. Like I said earlier, we're so instant gratification. And someone comes in like Father Christmas saying, oh, well, I'm going to give you all of these things for free. Our generation, more than any other generation, is absolutely going to eat that up. And the fact that, kind of like what I was saying earlier, that we are a compassionate generation. But what Bryce was saying, we don't really... Without knowing the gospel, honestly, you don't really know what compassion is, or compassion is kind of misdirected. And so our definition, or kind of the millennial definition of compassion, has ended up being total tolerance, total acceptance. Everything is fine. There's no morality. There's no right or wrong. And Bernie Sanders very much represents that. Everything is okay. Everyone is okay. We shouldn't have any moral compass, no discrimination against any kind of moral choices that someone might make. And I think our generation really relates to that. And we have misinterpreted his complete tolerance and acceptance of everything under the sun as love, as compassion. And somehow, all of a sudden, securing our borders becomes hate. And as you know, Hillary Clinton has talked about love trumps hate, which is very clever. And I think that we've really bought into that people like Bernie Sanders and like Hillary Clinton, they're just so accepting, so loving, and I think millennials just have really bought into that.
I would think so. A lot of phone calls here today, and even if we have too many phone calls, we'll carry those into the second hour, even after Allie Beth Stuckey leaves. But let's go to Louisiana this time. Ross, thank you for joining our conversation today.
Hi, good afternoon, guys.
We'd love to hear what you want to share with us.
Yeah, so let me just start by saying I'm a minister of God, filled with the Holy Ghost, operating in those gifts often as often as he chooses. And I really feel like, and I want to get to the millennials specifically, but I really feel the conservative party, any political party for that fact, as it relates to Christians, is missing out on the one standard that Jesus set first for us. I believe it's Luke 13:35, where he says, "You will know they are my disciples by the love that they have for one another. And so while I hear this discussion on what defines compassion, what defines love, love is, it's not a mystery. The love we have for our neighbor is not based on what they do in return for us, not based on how they act, what they believe. Our love is based on the love that God has given to us, which he gives us in light of our own mistakes and problems and faults. And so I just think that's such a big issue. And I just think politics has become such an idol in the church. It's grown sort of out of control.
Let me put you on hold real quickly because we have to go to one of the mandatory breaks. I'll let you make some comments about millennials. Then we'll come back, and some others want to speak to the issue of socialism and capitalism. So we have lots of conversation to have, but we need to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Allie Beth Stuckey. And Allie Beth, just before we get back to our conversation with Ross, let's talk about how people can get a copy of the Conservative Millennial blog. We have a link to it, and of course they can just click on right next to your picture there, go to it, and then it does a pop-up menu that allows people to subscribe. So this is available to anybody that would like to see what you're writing on a regular basis, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you can also get emails from me as soon as you log into the site. It should pop up, and you can enter your email and enter your name. Or if you go to the Contact Me page or the Book Me page or the About Me page, kind of on all pages, you can email me at conservativemillennialblog@gmail.com. You can ask me anything about politics or millennials or the conservative movement or any kind of movement on college campuses, and I would love to get back to you. I respond to emails within 24 hours, and so you will get a response from me. I can guarantee that, so feel free to reach out to me with any questions you have.
I might just mention, if you're a millennial, I think you really should sign up. If you're a parent or grandparent and have some young people that maybe need to be encouraged, this would be a link that you could send to them. Or, of course, you might want to download this podcast, send it to them, or the live cast on our YouTube channel, which will show up here in about an hour or so. So those are some ways in which you can get involved. Let's come back to Ross. And Ross, again, you were sharing some of the principles that we should apply about love and compassion. I think you said you were going to also talk about how this applies to the millennial generation. So you have the floor. What would you like to add?
Okay, so real quick, just to clarify, are we talking Christian millennials or millennials in general?
Well, a lot of the millennials who listen to this program probably are Christians, but not exclusively. That's for sure.
Good point. So I think when we talk about Christian millennials, and I think what appears to be a lean to the left, I think millennials see a lack of fruit in the old guard, if you want to call it that. Capitalism, the definition, sort of a system based on money, which doesn't really line up with the word, as opposed to socialism, which I know is a scary term, and Bernie Sanders really made a mistake in thinking that people were going to research what he has coined, this idea of democratic socialism, which is different from the socialism that scares so many baby boomers when we hear that word talking about, the Cold War and such.
Yeah.
But, Bernie missed the mark because it's a different brand, and it's a democratically elected socialism. So if we believe in the democratic process, then we shouldn't be so scared about a democratic socialism, which, again, if we're talking about the Bible, the early church was much more a socialist system than it was a democratic system.
Was it compulsory? Ross, was it compulsory? Really, was it compulsory or was it voluntary? Because socialism says, I have to do this, and if not, I get thrown in jail. Whereas as a Christian, I do that voluntarily. Whether you look at the Jerusalem church or others, that was a voluntary action. I think Christians should be very much involved in philanthropy, but what you're advocating here is something where the government has the authority to actually tell you where you will spend your money and to... And, of course, the big difficulty, Allie, we've talked about this before, Allie Beth, is that I think it's Margaret Thatcher that came up with the idea that the problem with socialism is sooner or later you run out of somebody else's money. And I'm really concerned about your generation, that you are inheriting from the previous generations, in large part the baby boom generation, almost $20 trillion in debt. I mean, I'm not sure where the rest of this money is going to come from.
Right, exactly. And I completely second exactly what you just said. That was going to be my response as well. I've heard a lot of people in my generation say, well, Jesus was a socialist. I actually had a professor in college try to argue that as well, that Jesus was a socialist, that the early church was a socialist. And what Ross was saying is fundamentally true in that, yes, Jesus, of course, promoted self-denial, self-sacrifice, taking care of your neighbor, absolutely. But what you said, Kerby, is that it wasn't from government compulsion. It was out of the goodness of our hearts or through the Holy Spirit that we were enabled to give with generosity. It was not under government compulsion. And that is the difference in the early church and socialism. And what I want every millennial Christian to know, because I've heard so many millennial Christians talk about Bernie Sanders and how they would rather vote for Bernie Sanders than any other candidate, especially more than Donald Trump. Because they believe that Bernie Sanders, really cares about the poor, and well, that's what the Bible teaches. But as I mentioned in my blog post on my blog, is that yes, Bernie Sanders might care about the poor. I am not saying he doesn't, but his solution to get there, socialism or democratic socialism, does not align with the Bible. I think a lot of people just look on the surface and say, yeah, it aligns with the Bible because we're supposed to give to the poor. Yes, you're supposed to give to the poor. Please give to the poor, give to charities, go out, serve the poor, do what you can with your own two hands. Do not trust the government to do it for you. That is not biblical. And so I obviously have very strong opinions on that. And with that, I really disagree with a lot of millennial Christians that say that socialism somehow is the more Christian point of view than capitalism. I do don't agree with that.
And one of the things I might just mention is our latest issue of Outlook, which is on the issue of socialism, is one that we put out because of some of the questions that people have. But let me give at least one more caller a chance to join us. The rest can go into the second hour. And Melissa in Texas, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Hi, Kerby. I've been talking to people that I run across, and especially millennials or anybody really, because this election is very popular right now, and everybody's talking about it everywhere. And I have a cousin who recently just got her doctorate degree in socialism, and she's a big Bernie Sanders fan. And I had the conversation. I was like, well, what do you think about the socialism now that you have this degree? When you make all this money under socialism, you're going to have to, it's all going to be fair and square across the board. You went to school all these years to earn this degree, but you're going to only get the same as everybody else. And then how long will it take before everybody else says, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to be a non-worker like everybody else. That way I'm going to get the same amount, so why not just be a non-worker? And then when you do that, eventually the government has to come in and say, okay, all of y'all are going to be workers, and we're going to tell you what you're going to do and how much you're going to do, and you're all going to get the same.
Got too many people in the wagon and not enough people pulling the wagon, right? At that point, government has to step in, because if everybody's in the wagon and they're waiting for somebody else to pull it, you got to get some people out of the wagon and get some people pulling it, right?
Yeah, and the other thing I would add is your speaker was talking about how the millennials of this generation are so very compassionate people, and I do run across that a lot. They would support a lot of causes. They're for the underdog. They're for the poor people, the homeless, and all those kinds of things. But I always take the opportunity to speak to them about the abortion issue, because a lot of them are turning around and they're not abortion-minded.
Right, and we're going to talk about that in the second hour, so that's a perfect setup,
Yeah, and so they do not believe in abortion.
Most pro-life generation,
That, to me, that's the link to get them and to get them to see your point of view from a conservative side, because they don't believe in abortion. And I usually just leave it with this. I make the statement that I could never, ever knowingly vote for someone who supports abortion.
I would agree.
I can't do that as a Christian. And and the other thing about socialism is,
got to take a break, unfortunately. Last comment.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me make that last comment, because I did want to give Allie Beth a chance to once again mention what's available on our website, a Conservative Millennial blog. What can people find when they land there?
Yeah, so Conservative Millennial blog, that's where I keep everyone up to date on millennial happenings and conservative ideas. You'll see just kind of my latest ideas and latest ponderings on the primaries and on the election. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's very serious. And whether you agree with me or not, feel free to email me at conservativemillennialblog@gmail.com. I would love to talk to you about anything political or what's happening on college campuses or in the millennial generation. Email me, and I will let you know within 24 hours.
Allie Beth, thank you for being with us. Let's do it again sometime. When we come back, we're going to spend some time talking about some of these abortion comments by Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and get back into election 2016. All that coming up right after this.
Is it just me, or does this year's election seem more contentious than ever? Even Christians are divided between which candidate to support. But one thing we must agree upon is the need to pray together. Each and every one of us must be on our knees asking God's mercy. Who is the right one to name the next Supreme Court justice, or 2 or 3? Honestly, I don't know, but God does. And we must petition him to act. Point of View has created its own campaign in the midst of the presidential campaign, Pray, Organize, Vote. We want to remind you of things to pray about. We want to help you educate fellow believers and get them out to vote. Sign up today at pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, and Vote. The future of America is at stake, and God's people are called to be good stewards of our votes. After you sign up, look at the bottom right corner for the red box that says Donate. Your gift will educate and motivate Christians during this critical time. Don't put it off. Visit now, pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, we're going to spend some time now talking about election 2016, but also kind of look back at a couple of these issues. If you have my commentary or have received it today or even heard it on air, talked about Disney's double standards. A lot of it has to do with what has been taking place in Georgia. And of course, last week we did talk about the fact that the governor of Georgia, Nathan Deal, decided to veto the bill HB 757. Now some people are calling for an attempt to override the governor's veto. We'll see where that goes. But since we just a few minutes ago were talking with Melissa about the issue of abortion, that was one of the topics I wanted to get into today. And the reason for that is multifold. First of all, of course, it's been in the news in large part because Chris Matthews on MSNBC asked Donald Trump about whether or not a woman would be punished. I mean, after all, you believe that abortion is wrong, and if abortion were once again declared illegally, there should be some penalty, not just to the abortionist, for the woman. Now, you have to understand the question was not asked in terms of the likelihood of that happening. I mean, seriously, does anyone seriously think that tomorrow the Supreme Court is going to wake up and slap their foreheads and say, well, wait a minute, Roe versus Wade was a terrible misjustice, a miscarriage of justice. It was an injustice against the unborn, and we need to go and right this wrong. No, of course not. I mean, it was a hypothetical created by Chris Matthews. And I think for some of you, it's worth mentioning that many of the individuals asking these questions are incredibly biased. And yet sometimes they present themselves as just asking honest questions. I mean, let's face it, Chris Matthews served in the various cabinets of different members of Congress for a number of years. They were all Democrats. He was a speechwriter for Jimmy Carter. He was the chief of staff for Tip O'Neill, who was Speaker of the House, all of them whom are Democrats. And so he was looking for a way to, number one, put Donald Trump on guard and to maybe get him to trip up. I think he did a pretty good job of that, but also to once again feed this war on women kind of mindset. And so as a result, we of course know what unfolded there. So some of the things I've actually posted on our website today are some things I wanted to talk about. One of those I'll get to in just a minute in terms of Donald Trump. But the first article I posted has to do with Hillary Clinton. Now that abortion's in the news, now that candidates are being asked about it, interestingly enough, on NBC's Meet the Press, she was asked about it. And interestingly enough, as the article that I've posted here by Bradford Richardson from the Washington Times, she ended up running afoul from both the pro-life community and the pro-choice community. The quote that has gotten her in trouble was this. Senator Hillary Clinton, or former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, said this: the unborn person doesn't have constitutional rights. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't do everything we possibly can in the vast majority of instances, to help a mother who is carrying a child and wants to make sure that child will be healthy to have appropriate medical support. Well, woo. And then she also went on to say there's room for some reasonable kinds of restrictions on abortion. Well, this did not set well with the pro-choice crowd, or the pro-abortion crowd, however you want to call them, because, first of all, she referred to that as an unborn person. Oh, boy. A person is guaranteed constitutional rights. Persons under the 14th Amendment are guaranteed constitutional rights. And so that, of course, is something that the pro-life people pointed out. Wait a minute, if it's a person, if it's a human being, it's a person, it has constitutional rights. But the pro-choice people said, no, we don't want you to say that because we want to do anything we can to deny the humanity of the unborn. And so you've had all sorts of various Twitter posts out here. One of those further stigmatizes than abortion, and people saying that she should not have referred to this fetus as an unborn child or later restrictions or even a person. And so this has kind of created a little bit of a firestorm, which I think will subside pretty quickly. But I think it illustrates for you to hold to certain views, especially views like this on the issue of abortion. You have to deny reality. And that is, you will look at the guidelines here, and this was in the article as well. If you go to the second page of the article I've posted here, guidelines issued by Planned Parenthood discourage pro-choice advocates from using terms like abort a child, or, and some, of course, they would certainly say don't call it a person. So they say, let's use more appropriate alternatives like end a pregnancy or have an abortion, because they don't want to talk about this. And of course, the problem with all of these denials of reality is they only work for so long. And that is an individual that says, well, there's no human being in the womb. Well, what is it? Is it a giraffe? Is it a rhinoceros? Is it an elephant? It's obviously a human being. So then they say, well, it's not a person. That's the game the Supreme Court played back in 1973. Okay, maybe it is a Homo sapiens, has 46 chromosomes like any other human being, and if put in a non-hostile environment, it becomes what we call a what? Baby. But it's not a person. Well, then Hillary Clinton went one step further and said the unborn person doesn't have constitutional rights. Oh, yes, it does. If you are a person under the 14th Amendment, you have rights. And so this has been a bit of a firestorm. Now, don't expect to hear about it a lot other than here on Point of View. But I think it's kind of intriguing to recognize that this has not also only been a problem for Donald Trump. It's also been a problem for Hillary Clinton. The second article I posted here by Kevin McCullough, why does Donald Trump assert that he is pro-life? And he goes through some of the reasons why he has real questions about whether Donald Trump is pro-life, not the least of which is that the various stands that Donald Trump has taken on the issue of abortion and on the issue of Planned Parenthood have changed sometimes hour by hour, certainly day by day, and certainly month by month. He said early in the campaign, for example, Donald Trump claimed that he would completely defund Planned Parenthood and asserted that the baby parts scandal proved that it was a horrible organization. In less than a week later, he adjusted to reasoning that Planned Parenthood was necessary because it does lots of good for women. His position shifted to defunding only the funds that go to abortion. And so he went on to explain, that is Kevin McCullough, that to be clear, the $500 million+ that we give to Planned Parenthood kept the lights on for every abortion procedure. It paid the rent. It gave the suction machines electricity. It paid the salaries. To be clear, Planned Parenthood should have all federal funding ended. And anyone who does not take the 10 seconds to read this paragraph to understand why is not pro-life. Then he goes on to begin to talk about some of the other ways in which you've had Donald Trump kind of flip-flop on the issue. And so this is one of the reasons why Kevin McCullough says, I really just cannot believe that Donald Trump is pro-life. He may have changed his position. And when a person changes their position, I'm grateful, especially when they change it to the right. If you flop to the right decision, that's a good thing. But at the same time, I think it's reasonable, as it was 4 years ago, to be skeptical about Mitt Romney, who said he was pro-choice when running as governor of Massachusetts, and then all of a sudden became conveniently pro-life when he was running for the presidency. And the same thing when Donald Trump said he was pro-choice, pro-abortion. Now he says he's pro-life. It's reasonable to be skeptical. But what are your thoughts? Certainly the issue of abortion and pro-life has become part of our particular issue. And if you'd like to join the conversation on that, 1-800-351-1212. We'll look a little bit more at some of the other key issues in this campaign right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, we all love Disney movies and Disney theme parks, but I doubt too many Christians loved what Disney threatened to do in Georgia. The Disney company threatened to pull back its film and television productions in Atlanta and force the governor's veto of a religious freedom bill that would protect pastors and Christian businesses from gay bullies. Meanwhile, the Disney company has placed theme parks in China. In fact, a $5.5 billion theme park will soon open in Shanghai, China. This is the same country that had a brutal one-child policy and forced abortions. This is a country with a terrible legacy of human rights abuses, with brutal crackdowns and labor camps. If you don't see the hypocrisy and double standard of these two positions, then I'm not sure there is much more that I can say that will make you see the obvious. It reminded me of the famous essay by one of my Georgetown professors. In her essay on dictatorships and double standards, Jeane Kirkpatrick was critical of the Carter administration's demands that autocratic countries quickly liberalize their policies while rarely applying such rhetoric to communist governments. Disney would be good to focus its attention on the repression in China before ever threatening to punish Georgia for wanting to protect people of faith. David French asked this question: why does the Walt Disney Company prefer communists to Christians? The Religious Freedom Bill is actually something that the Disney Company would support, but they're listening to gay activists. The bill would protect pastors from being forced to officiate at homosexual weddings and protect religious organizations from having to rent their facilities for events that violated their beliefs. Disney's double standard needs to be exposed for what it is. The company is willing to turn a blind eye to the huge log of true discrimination in China, but then turns around to focus on an alleged speck in the eye of Georgia. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, God's Not Dead 2. A question about Jesus could cost Grace Wesley everything. Now playing, rated PG. God'sNotDeadTheMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Just in a minute, we'll take some phone calls, 1-800-351-1212, if you'd like to address this issue of abortion in the campaign. But let's, if we can, also look at something else that I've posted. I posted an article about Hillary Clinton's abortion comments and some of the controversy there. An article about, is Donald Trump really pro-life? And you can read Kevin McCullough's article in its entirety, and it just reminds us again of all the flip-flops that have come from Donald Trump and his campaign. But the third one I wanted to get to before we take some phone calls, and that is why we aren't hearing from the press or even a lot of Democrats about the fact that the Democratic presidential nomination is rigged. Because in some respects, all the conversation is, well, why is John Kasich still in the campaign? Ted Cruz has to get 87% of the remaining delegates to win. Donald Trump's not going to get enough delegates to stop a contested convention, which are all important points. And we spend a fair amount of time here talking about this. But Bernie Sanders just the other day captured 3 more states, Hawaii, Alaska, Washington. If you want to do the count, interestingly enough, Hillary Clinton has 1,712. He has 1,011. So he's still a bit away from where she is. But if you take the super delegates out, Hillary Clinton has 469. He has 31. You see that, you know, he will probably win Wisconsin tomorrow. There's 96 delegates at stake. It's more proportional, so he won't necessarily gain that much on her. But the point is that he is winning almost everywhere right now. The momentum is definitely behind Bernie Sanders. And yet you've got to recognize that with Hillary Clinton now adding the superdelegates in there, she can just kind of come in second from now until June. and still get the requisite number of 2,383 delegates necessary to be nominated. So she will probably limp to the nomination, and nobody really, I think, can deny that that won't take place. But it gets back to these over 700 delegates that are superdelegates. And the article I've posted here, some of you have asked, well, what is a superdelegate? Well, these are individuals that actually are not bound to any individual. And they said, okay, how do you become a superdelegate? And on the second page, you can read that. You can be a current or former president of the United States, a current or former vice president, a member of Congress, a governor, a former majority leader, minority leader, former speaker of the House, minority leader, a member of the Democratic Party. So you have more than 700 of these individuals that actually are going to determine more than the election itself who will be the Democratic nominee. So that is an important issue, to put it mildly, and I am surprised that, first of all, the press hasn't done more to cover it, but we've posted this article today that asks the question, why is the press not talking about the rigged Democratic presidential nomination? So I would encourage you to read that, maybe even pass it on to your friends in the Democratic Party and say, can you explain this to us? I mean, this is where basically the Democratic establishment says, well, we'll let you go vote, and we'll let you go to primaries, we'll let you go to caucuses, but we will still make sure that the party leaders determine who the next nominee is. And so it's always been rigged against Bernie Sanders since the very beginning. And just before I take some phone calls, let me also talk about the Republican nomination right now. Again, Donald Trump has up until today 736, Ted Cruz 463, of course John Kasich 143. Tomorrow it's quite likely that Ted Cruz will win, and this is a winner take most, not quite a winner take all, but a winner take most. But there are 42 delegates at stake in the Republican side. Probably 40 will end up in the column for Ted Cruz, and then probably 2 for Donald Trump. But after that, it is very definitely in favor of Donald Trump, because they go to New York and Connecticut. Those are proportional. So it's possible that Ted Cruz picks up, 30 in New York and 10 in Connecticut. Then you go to Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania. Those all are winner take all. So all of those delegates go to Donald Trump unless something remarkably changes. And so that means that by really about the 26th of April, if you use those numbers, adding Rhode Island in there too, because that's a proportional one, you have a situation in which at least it's clear that Ted Cruz would need more delegates than there are delegates left to get. That puts him out mathematically, but also Ted Cruz winning tomorrow. And if Ted Cruz wins one of those eastern states, it eliminates the possibility that Donald Trump gets the requisite 1,236. So there are just a lot of things still on the horizon here that need to be covered. And so from time to time, I want to come back to election 2016, and that's why we're here. I can see that some of you would like to address that issue, so let's go to our first phone call. He'd like to remain anonymous, so I guess he told me to call him Norman. So Norman, you got the floor.
Thank you for taking my call. I wonder why every election cycle we come to the same place as God's people, that we find ourselves, if you will, behind the 8 ball, always trying to choose the lesser of two evils. You know what? This isn't right. There are good, godly men out there that are capable of leading. We need a third party. We never should have gotten on board with the idea that it's got to be a Democrat or a Republican. That's false thinking. And the other thing I want to say about that is I think that both of these frontrunners in the so-called conservative party would both of them fail. For example, 1 Timothy 3's requisites for what it would be to be an overseer in the church. I grant you that's not what they're applying for here. But if they don't have their own family in order, if they don't have a past that reflects it, like, for example, I have a really hard question to ask on the behalf of truth for all of us that follow Christ. And that is, did, in fact, Ted Cruz join and side with Barack Obama and vote for the TPP, which is an absolute vote for global government? It's to replace nationalism. And if that's true, which I've heard on several programs, then this man doesn't qualify, let alone why would his wife work for a company that's got to have done more harm than almost anywhere that we can think of on earth to just working people. But I certainly do not support the background whatsoever of a person like Donald Trump. Why do we not have a third-party alternate that's a good, godly leader in light of what the Scripture teaches?
And again, the quick answer to your question, which deserves maybe a program unto itself, is there have been some attempts to do that. Like, for example, the Constitution Party that was started by Howard Phillips. And the difficulty, Norman, with that is that we have in these various states, because the elections are really run by the states, a real bias against a third party. And so whether it was the Reform Party or whether it's the Libertarian Party or whether it was the Constitution Party, which was really a Christian-based party, they've always had difficulty even getting their nominee on all of the 50 ballots. There have been some that have been more successful. Libertarian usually gets on all 50 ballots, but there is just an incredible bias historically in our country against that. Now, to be honest with you, I would love that, because if you've gone to Israel, or you can even use Italy and some others where you've got multi-party systems, then you really have to run a lot more on the issues, and you don't have this kind of mindset that for our Democratic listeners out right now, they might say, I disagree with this issue on abortion with you, but I agree with some of the stands that the Democratic Party has. And they say, well, where are you going to go? And the same thing on the Republican side, they might say, well, I'm pro-life, but I disagree with some of the stands you have on global government or whatever it might be, since you mentioned TPP for a moment. And they go, well, where are you going to go? Over the other party? And so they kind of hold people hostage. And so I think a third party would be really good, but I really think it's got to be developed from the grassroots, and we would have to ultimately change some of the election regulations so that it would be a much more viable alternative than what we have right now. So that's the sad reality of why we don't have it. And the few attempts that have been developed, the Reform Party under Ross Perot, Howard Phillips developing the Constitution Party, and of course you had the Libertarian Party for years. None of them have been very successful because, again, we've got an electoral college that says you have to win individual electors in each state to ultimately gain the presidency. So that's kind of where we are. And I recognize the question and the frustration you have. If I were to come up to the average American right now and say, do you think that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are the two most qualified people to be president? I doubt you'd get very many people that would say yes. And so we've got some issues there. Appreciate your call and your question. And when we come back, we're going to take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll get into a couple of the other issues, but we've put on everything from the abortion comments to the Democratic nomination, the possibility that eventually Ted Cruz would not be able to get the requisite number of delegates, and even the possibility that Donald Trump will not. That gets us into a contested Republican convention. That'd be interesting. We'll see what that brings. And we'll take some more of your phone calls right after this.
From Pure Flix comes God's Not Dead 2. A classroom answer to an honest question about Jesus could cost Grace Wesley the teaching career she loves.
I would rather stand with God and be judged by the world than stand with the world and be judged by God.
God's Not Dead 2. Now playing. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at godsnotdead.com.
In case you didn't know it, there's a presidential election in November, and it's shaping up like something out of Judges chapter 9 in the Bible. Our country is as divided as ever, and it's time for Christians to pull out our secret weapon. Yes, we must vote. Yes, we need to organize others to join us, but most important, we need to pray. We need to pray. Point of View will help you do that when you sign up for our Pray, Organize, Vote campaign at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, Vote. Stay informed. Get practical tools at pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
I'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Abortion has been one of the topics. Nomination process another, and we'll get into a little bit later the call for maybe an override of the veto by the governor of Georgia on HB 757. So a couple of issues to address today. Let's go back to the phones while we're talking about abortion. Rosemary in California would like to address that issue, so thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. Yeah, my name is Rosemary Moran. I'm calling you from Sacramento, California. And yes, I would like to comment on that. I would like to say that instead of, the women doing abortions, they should put them up for adoption, because there's a lot of people like me, for instance. I'm 48 years old, and my kids are grown, and they live on their own now. And I don't have anybody. I would love to adopt a baby, you know what I mean? I would love to do things, and the reason I say that is because there's always, how do you say, a recurring dream that I get, but God loves us all. He does. He's so merciful. But there's consequences, society, it has brainwashed our women to think that abortion is like a drive-through McDonald's to go do it.
Very sad.
And what you call it, and they don't understand that there's a consequence if they do that, because society doesn't tell them. They just tell them, oh, you're not ready to have a kid, a baby, whatever, and there's this, but no. Just put them up for adoption, because that dream that I get is recurring, and it's very, very beautiful. Jesus takes me, and he walks me by my hand, and he takes me, and he shows me a lake not of water, but of blood. And there's people in there drowning back and forth. And I said, what is that? And he tells me, that's the lake of the innocent blood of the aborted children. He says, people that have partake on that are drowning. And I said, oh, Lord, how can we help them? And he says, by prayer. Merciful Father, you prayer, they could take them out.
Sure. And I would add to it, supporting your local pregnancy resource center and providing alternatives and helping a woman who sees abortion as the only solution to her so-called crisis pregnancy to recognize that she should choose life. And again, I know there'd be people who'd be willing to adopt those children. I mean, look how hard it is for couples that are infertile to adopt right now, because there just aren't that many opportunities.
Yeah, and our Lord, our God, they're so merciful, but, they get angered, especially our merciful Father. He's very angered on abortion, but he loves us so much that prayer will take them out, but there's consequence. So that's why everybody should know, don't do abortion. If you can't have your child or whatever, put them up to adoption. I'll take them.
Okay.
And there's many people that will adopt them.
Rosemary, I appreciate your phone call. Let's take a few more calls here. We've been talking about the election here and always give you a chance to join the conversation. Let's head out to South Carolina this time. Freddie, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Well, I was just going to call in and talk about, thank you for having me, but I was calling in to talk about the Trump Cruz saga.
Go for it.
I voted for Cruz in South Carolina, and don't you know how foolish I feel right now, because I voted for him because I thought he was against the establishment, and now they have wrapped themselves around him, and they have made him their man, and it just absolutely sickens me. And the Trump issue with the abortion, if they make abortion illegal, they have to do something. That is a child. I'm sorry, it's not test subjects. It's not a fetus. That's a baby. And I can't understand why it's such a big deal. If they make it illegal, there has to be some kind of punishment. I agree with that. But let me tell you, the woman is under punishment from the day that she gets pregnant and has to make that decision, and then she has to live with that decision the rest of her life. And I don't know what kind of law they would set in place for the woman if she has an abortion, but if it's a law, there'll have to be something, because we live in the United States, and when you break the law, I'm sorry, but you have to be punished, and that breaks my heart for the women, because I am 100% pro-life for the baby and for the women, and all the anguish that they have to live through with the rest of their life. It breaks my heart. God help them all. God help all of us.
Yeah, again, if we had a punishment, I'd certainly want to have some latitude, because you know, Freddie, if you've listened to this program any length of time, over the years we've had women here that were pressured by their parents, drugged to the abortion clinic by their boyfriends, that were not complicit in this action, that others did not even understand what they were doing. I mean, so this is why I think that is such a red herring as an argument or a question to even be asked. And of course, I understand that the reason it was done in large part by Chris Matthews was simply to try to create this hubbub and try to mobilize a Democratic base that needed some enthusiasm, because they weren't very enthusiastic about Hillary Clinton. But nevertheless, on the Ted Cruz thing, I still think he's anti-establishment. I don't see any difference in his attitude towards wanting to shake things up, even if he's had some of the establishment come his direction. But the reality is, I don't think either Donald Trump or Ted Cruz are going to come to the convention with 1237 delegates, and so it will be an interesting convention there in Cleveland. So I appreciate you calling today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and call again. Let's give a few more of you a chance to join our conversation. We'll stay in South Carolina for another minute. WLPE. Daniel, what would you like?
I don't think either of the candidates, Republican candidates, we know the Democrats aren't pro-life, but either of the candidates for Republicans are pro-life. They're all for killing the child, for rape, incest, and the health of the mother. So I don't think it's right for you to take one over the other, to try to depict one's better than the other, when neither of them are truly pro-life. And like the previous caller said, Cruz is nothing but a crucifier who is doing nothing but trying to crucify Trump for his stand when he is in the bag for the establishment. Just like we heard this weekend, that Graham now is supporting Cruz, and so are many of the other establishment Republicans. And I am just so fed up with the complicity of the Republicans in the House and the Senate, who, through inaction, has caused the anger in Christians. I'm a Christian, who's caused the anger in us to the extent that we are searching for that third party. And I believe Trump is that third party, and he's going to be the one who, through some sort of change, gives hope back to America, if it's not too late.
Now, again, the point I would make is that if you wanted somebody who was consistently pro-life, I would say that would be Ted Cruz. He's demonstrated that in his speeches and his votes. But maybe we'll find out that Donald Trump is as well. But it sounds to me like you don't like either of them. But then you went for Trump, but it's not on the abortion issue, right? Because
no,
obviously,
sir, don't misunderstand me. I am for Trump 110%, and I do not apologize for that. I think that he's shaking up the establishment.
Well, that's true.
He is causing them to rethink their complicity in this. And the way things are going now, I mean, they told us if we gave them the House, they would make changes. They told us if we gave them the Senate, they promised they would make changes. And they did absolutely nothing. This president that we have has gotten us into a $19 trillion debt, has broken our strength in our military to the degree now where the next president will be so helpless in trying to regain our strength through the fact that we're so in debt that we're going to be something close to a third world country, and that was his intent. I honestly believe that Obama was sent from the depths of hell to teach us as Americans a lesson for turning our backs on him over the last generation.
Well, a lot of people that say they're voting for Donald Trump or would want to vote for Donald Trump is they use the old Albert Einstein axiom, which I'm not even sure he said, but has been attributed to him, and that is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. If you think what's going on over the last 7 years is what you want more of, then I'm pretty sure that Hillary Clinton will give you that, and I'm pretty sure Bernie Sanders will give you that. But if you want to reverse that, then you better look on the other side of the aisle. And I can see some of you want to address the issue of third-party candidates. We certainly can cover that. Every issue's on the table here on Point of View, so we'll give you that chance to do so right after these messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let's take a few more phone calls. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Lula in Texas, KBJS. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, sir. This is my question. Why do they say they contribute to Planned Parenthood? I guess that's the name of it in general. And they say it helps women's health. I'm not sure what that means exactly, what they're doing for the women's health. But anyway, why don't they change the name of it and not contribute to Planned Parenthood?
Well, and again, the Congress right now has proposed, and this is a bill that, of course, was vetoed by the president, that the money that goes to Planned Parenthood instead would go to community health organizations that exist are all over the country. Matter of fact, there's actually, I believe, more of them than there are Planned Parenthood clinics. And then you don't have any of the money going to abortion. But a lot of people say, well, why can't Planned Parenthood not do abortion? Because two words, Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger is the founder of Planned Parenthood, and she believed in population control. She's the one that said that the most merciful thing that a large family can do is to kill one of its infant members. And it's, she was the one that was saying that we should only allow individuals to have 2 children because, after all, wage workers could not have more than 2 children because they could not support them. And, of course, she is the one that proposed everything from eugenics to abortion. So Planned Parenthood started as a way to actually begin to clean the races up. She even talked about that as well, that birth control and abortion were the ways to have a cleaner race. We need to get rid of some of those individuals. And it's not surprising, as we've documented on this program many times before, that a large number of these abortion clinics are located where? In places where you have high percentages of African American and Hispanic Americans. So the idea that we could somehow maybe support Planned Parenthood if they don't do abortions, well, that's not happening. And the idea that, well, then let's support a way that we could help women's health, well, that is a solution, but that would go to something other than Planned Parenthood. And, of course, Cecile Richards and others have such an influence on at least the Democratic Party that if that's ever going to happen, you have to have, first of all, a Republican House and Senate. You'd also have to have a Republican pro-life president in order for that to take place. So, nevertheless, that's a quick answer to a question that comes up quite frequently, and maybe reason for us once again to maybe do a program in the future on the history of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, and the influence of Planned Parenthood today. But let's go back to the phones. I want to give as many of you a chance to join our conversation today. We'll go to Georgia once again on the Good News Network. David, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes. We had one caller call in a little earlier and said that if we had a third-party Christian run, that we'd vote for him, or the people would. If a Christian had, and then the last caller says he's a Christian, but yet he's going to vote for Donald Trump, which ain't a Christian. Even if a Christian would run, we live in such an ungodly nation now, people would not vote him in. And I'm talking about the church, not the sinners. The church is the one that needs to repent. If my people.
Well said. And that was the argument. We had Robert Jeffress in studio a while back and gave you at least an opportunity in the last half hour of our interview to ask him some questions. And his argument is I'm not so sure that America anymore could elect a very overt born-again Christian to the presidency. And if you look at somebody like Mike Huckabee, for example, who was a pastor, or even some of the others that had some kind of Christian veneer around them, like Marco Rubio and others, that may be a possibility. And back to your point, David, it's one of the reasons why later in the week we're going to be talking about this gathering of 30,000 pastors at the Lincoln Memorial this Saturday, and I'm going to be doing the radio broadcast of that, just to pray for this nation. Not to protest, but just simply to say we need as a nation to seek God's forgiveness. But back to your point also, we need a kind of the church to begin to think biblically about these issues, and certainly that's one of the missions of us here at Point of View. But let me, if I can, just take a few more phone calls real quickly. Let me go to Katie in Missouri, KNEO. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, I'm listening to these people, and they act like they're so angry, and yet over Ted Cruz, I've watched him, and I've watched how he voted when he went into the Senate, and I don't have any problems with his votes. You can't put all of the people that went in and say all of you didn't do what you said you was going to do. And as far as I'm going to vote for either one of them that ends up. And if it goes to the other and there's a big debate over it, and the second vote it comes up and Ted Cruz wins, I'll vote for him. And if it comes up that Donald Trump wins, but I'm not going into this saying that Donald Trump, because I have nothing to base Donald Trump on. there is a record behind Ted Cruz, and you can follow his record. So you can say everything, but until you do something, I don't know what you're going to do.
Well, and there's something about experience that helps. I don't either. First of all, I figured this out a long time ago. When somebody makes a commitment to a candidate, then that's usually enough to then come up with all the reasons why they would support that candidate and all the reasons why they wouldn't vote for it. And I'm a little more of saying, look, I recognize I can give you a long list of questions that you could ask about either of those candidates. But when it comes down to whether that candidate, whoever it is, Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, or even if the establishment likes to throw in somebody there, I can tell you that whoever that nominee is on the Republican side is going to be preferable in so many different ways, just on the Supreme Court nominees alone, than the people that Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders had put there. And so I recognize that these our individuals have flaws. I understand some of the frustration here. Why can't we have a third party, Christian party, and all the rest? And I think I tried to give you a pretty good answer for that. There are real biases right now in our election laws. And my argument is if we really want to have a true third party, and I would welcome it, then let's start at the grassroots. Let's not try to start at the top. Let's start at the bottom. Let's create a third party that begins to win legislative races and maybe in a governor's race and get to that point. But to say, well, I'm going to just pick somebody I really like and I'm going to then try to elect whether it was a Ross Perot on the Reform Party side or a Howard Phillips on the conservative side, or whether it was a Ralph Nader on the progressive side, and make them president. Well, we know how that turned out. It really is a complete disaster, and that's a good way to make sure that you elect a Democrat. And that's kind of what happened.
Right. Right. That's right.
Wish we had more time, but there's always tomorrow. And let me just mention that tomorrow we're going to get into some more of these very important issues. O.S. Hawkins is going to be with us. He's been in the studio with us before, and we'll be talking about his new book. And also Nabil Qureshi has been with us in studio. He'll be actually calling in from Oxford because that's where he is right now. But he had a very good piece that came out in USA Today, has a new book out on answering jihad. So we're going to get into the issue of Islam in a lot more detail. Throughout the week, we're going to be talking with some great guests and, of course, our Friday weekend edition. So there'll still be chances for you to express your opinions about various candidates and also to talk a little bit more about some of these issues. But today I wanted to at least point you to some of the articles we've posted on the fact that abortion has not only been a controversial issue for Donald Trump, but candidate Hillary Clinton ran into some interesting reactions from even her own party as well as from the pro-life community. And we've posted those articles as well as some things about the rigged Democratic nomination and even how the Supreme Court's going to be addressing this issue of immigration. So a lot of those articles available on our website, pointofview.net. Those of you in Wisconsin, you get to vote tomorrow. We'll spend some time talking about that on Wednesday. And if you haven't voted yet and would like more information, it's all available at our Pray, Organize, and Vote election resources. All of it available at the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Is it just me, or does this year's election seem more contentious than ever? Even Christians are divided between which candidate to support. But one thing we must agree upon is the need to pray together. Each and every one of us must be on our knees asking God's mercy. Who is the right one to name the next Supreme Court justice, or 2 or 3? Honestly, I don't know, but God does. And we must petition Him to act. Point of View has created its own campaign in the midst of the presidential campaign, Pray, Organize, Vote. We want to remind you of things to pray about. We want to help you educate fellow believers and get them out to vote. Sign up today at pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, and Vote. The future of America is at stake, and God's people are called to be good stewards of our votes. After you sign up, look at the bottom right corner for the red box that says Donate. Your gift will educate and motivate Christians during this critical time. Don't put it off. Visit now, pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do. And